Hi everyone, how are you? If you're from Facebook or TikTok, the timing for you to watch the rest of the story will be down below. E se você é here from YouTube, welcome to our channel. Enjoy, subscribe to our channel too so you don't miss any more stories. E let's enjoy the story.
My sister loved playing one of the boys. She spent her days bossing her siblings around, making them fund her little whims, and even having them do her everyday laundry. At her engagement party, Thomas presented her with the ring. She laughed right in front of a room packed with guests. Thomas, are you seriously still on this? I see you as a brother and you want to marry me? That's just awkward. The entire room froze, but she didn't seem to care in the slightest. After all, Thomas had been in love with her since they were kids. She figured that this time, just like the countless times before, he would swallow his pride and beg for forgiveness. But Thomas just stood in silence for a few seconds before snapping the velvet ring box shut. Then, his gaze shifted to me, sitting quietly in a corner. The tension in the room was almost palpable, suffocating the murmurs of the high society crowd that had gathered to celebrate an engagement now lying in pieces. The lights from the majestic crystal chandeliers seemed to flash with an accusatory glare as Thomas's eyes, cold and stripped of his former blind devotion, locked onto mine. His voice, deep and steady, echoed through the dead silence of the massive ballroom, amplified by the acoustics of the luxurious space. He stared right at me and dropped the question that would alter the course of our lives forever. Amy Newell, will you marry me? The echo of his words seemed to suspend time itself. I stood up and walked toward the towering, brightly lit stage, feeling every single stare in the room pinning me down like needles. Before I could even take a third step, Cindy's fingers dug into my arm like claws. Her grip was desperate, painful, and her ragged breathing betrayed the cracks in her facade of superiority. Amy, you're not. Well, she hissed in my ear, her breath heavy with panic thinly disguised as concern. Don't overexert yourself. A soft laugh escaped my lips, a light, liberating sound that violently contrasted with the heaviness of the moment. I shook off her grip with a fluid, deliberate motion, letting her hand drop into thin air and stood right in front of Thomas's imposing figure. I looked him in the eye, finding an absolute determination that mirrored the silent storm I had always carried inside. I will, I said, my voice crystal clear and without a single tremor. Cindy's face twisted completely, her carefree rebel girl mask shattering to pieces in front of hundreds of corporate elite guests. Disbelief stained her features, twisting her usual beauty into a mask of pure horror. Amy, you've lost your mind, she spat, momentarily forgetting the audience watching her every move. I turned slowly, holding her erratic gaze with a glacial, destructive calm. Didn't you say marriage is outdated and suffocating? I asked, letting the words hang in the thick, electrified air. You can't call it useless and then get mad when someone else cleans it up, right? My sister's jaw clenched so hard I could practically hear her teeth grinding from a distance. She was left completely speechless, paralyzed, suffocated by her own arrogance finally backfiring on her. Thomas, however, let out a genuine, almost predatory smile. He raised the microphone again, making sure every syllable reached the farthest corner of the room. Excellent. The Harrison Group formally chooses Amy Newell. As if the universe itself was choreographing the scene for my twisted triumph, the intense spotlights that were supposed to bathe Cindy in glory all night shifted their trajectory. They fell entirely on me, wrapping me in an undeniable, blinding halo of light. A few feet away, trapped in the shadows she had summoned herself, Cindy crossed her arms with a cold, rehearsed smirk on her lips. She wasn't truly panicking yet. In her narcissistic, untouchable mind, she thought Thomas was just putting on a dramatic show to make her jealous. After all, for years, all she had to do to get her way was shrug, flash a condescending smile, and say, "Come on, bro, don't be mad." And Thomas, loyal as a blind dog, always came running back. But tonight, the script had been tossed into the fire. In the plush backseat of the family town car, on the way back to the Newell estate, the silence was overwhelming and suffocating. The AC barely managed to cut through the thick atmosphere. The city's neon lights blurred past the tinted windows, casting long, tense shadows across our faces. Cindy was the first to break the unbearable quiet, unable to hold back the venom burning in her blood. "I had no idea, Amy," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she glared at me with contempt. "You play the quiet, fragile sister so well, but you sure move fast when it's time to take something for yourself." Kept my eyes fixed on the night landscape, watching the towering skyscrapers roll by without altering my elegant posture in the slightest. "You didn't say you didn't want it," I replied, my tone void of any emotion, cold as marble. She choked on her own words, an indignant gasp suddenly caught in her throat. I didn't give her time to recover and continued, turning my head slowly to lock eyes directly with her. "You told everyone he was your brother. People don't marry their brothers. I'm just helping you respect the sacred bond of brotherhood you preach so much about. Why are you so upset?" Cindy went deathly pale, as if all the oxygen had been vacuumed right out of her lungs. My mother, ever faithful to her primal instinct to protect her loud, golden child, immediately jumped to her defense from the front seat, twisting around to face us. "Amy, please, stop taking shots at your sister. She was just talking without thinking tonight. It was just party jitters." Talking without thinking almost cost us the entire Harrison Group investment, a capital injection we desperately need, my father shot back, frowning deeply, glaring at me through the rearview mirror. "Amy," I turned toward the front of the vehicle, nipping his patriarchal reprimand in the bud. "Dad, I'm just stating the exact facts of what just went down." The inside of the car plunged back into a freezing, uncomfortable silence. That was when Cindy suddenly smiled, a calculating, wicked gesture, softening, her tone to play the misunderstood protector. "I didn't want to marry him because I refused to be trapped in a domestic cage, clipping my wings," she sighed dramatically. "But you're different. You've been sickly since you were a little girl. You're fragile. You can't handle the high pressure world of the Harrison family or their cutthroat business. I did all this because I'm just looking out for you. I was so incredibly sick of hearing that damn speech. Looking out for me. That was the golden excuse, the impenetrable shield behind which her absolute tyranny operated. It was why she secretly changed my college application, making sure I didn't go to the Ivy League school that had accepted me. It was why she turned down lucrative career opportunities on my behalf behind my back, claiming my health couldn't handle the long hours. It was why she took the commercial project proposal I spent months pulling all-nighters to research, and, with total and utter nerve, slapped her own name on the cover to win favor with the board of directors. I opened my designer bag with calculated, unhurried movements, pulled out my high-end tablet, and unlocked it with a swipe. The screen's glow lit up my deadpan face in the darkness of the vehicle. I opened a hidden, encrypted folder and turned the screen directly toward them. "You call this looking out for me?" I asked, my voice slicing through the stale air like a razor blade. On the bright, high-res screen was an exhaustive, chronological, and detailed record of every single damn time my life had been systematically sabotaged since childhood. Intercepted emails, tampered submission dates, saved audio clips. I slowly scrolled through the evidence, letting every betrayal be exposed under the harsh light of truth. The only sound in the car was my parents' ragged, erratic breathing as they read the documents. My mother's expression grew incredibly tense, her eyes wide, her face a portrait of denial and horror. "Why on earth are you keeping a meticulous record of all this?" she asked, her voice trembling, desperately trying to shift the blame onto my calculating methods instead of facing the obvious villainy of her other daughter. I stared her down, not blinking once. Because I realized a long time ago that, without hard, irrefutable proof, my side of the story in this house is always treated as a lie brought on by my fragility. Cindy finally sat up straight, the fake sweetness vanishing from her face, replaced by genuine panic. "Do you honestly think I took your opportunities? Didn't you do that yourself by being incapable of taking them?" Thick, perfect, meticulously, rehearsed tears began to well up in her big eyes. "I shielded you from those things because I was terrified the relentless stress would work you to death. Did you ever bother to ask me what I actually wanted?" She froze under my scrutiny. The atmosphere turned to stone. "When did I ever say I didn't want to go?" I asked, leaning a few inches closer to her, destroying her safe personal space. "When did I give you explicit permission to rewrite the script of my life?" Cindy, I suggest you stop calling pure, blatant greed protection. My dad glared at me furiously, his white knuckles gripping the steering wheel with excessive force as he drove. We are a family. Don't use such harsh words when talking about your sister. I smiled, a lethal curve that didn't reach my eyes. Dad, it's called being clear, and it's about time we settle the outstanding debts in this family. The show is over. Cindy gritted her teeth, her face morphing into a mask of pure rage and desperation. So you planned this whole thing tonight to destroy me. But Amy, you're dead wrong about one thing. Thomas only wants me. His heart belongs to me, and it always has. He only proposed to you in front of everyone. Tonight to piss me off, to hurt my pride. It's a temper tantrum. I didn't bother responding to her pathetic, desperate monologue. I looked back out the window, but deep down, I was absolutely certain of one thing. This time, the victory was mine. The next day, the corporate and social worlds woke up to a media firestorm. The official joint press release from the Harrison Group and the Newell Group went viral in a matter of minutes, crashing business magazine servers. In the flawless official photo attached, I stood there, radiating serene elegance and calculated power, next to the imposing Thomas Harrison. We were both firmly holding the newly signed marriage and business agreement. The comment sections across all platforms went wild. Some people ate up the ruthless brutality and soap opera drama of a last-minute bride swap in the middle of such a high-profile merger. Others theorized, frantically, hitting the forums to ask if Cindy had cowardly bailed on her own wedding under pressure. The ultimate humiliation was cemented when some internet genius took the leaked audio from the night before and turned Cindy's iconic "who marries their brother" excuse into a viral soundbite, overlaid with trending beats and thousands of crying, laughing emojis. Cindy, unable to handle the public humiliation, locked herself tight in her bedroom at the mansion. Still, she was frantically active on social media, firing off passive-aggressive subs like poisoned darts. Some people really love picking up scraps and living in a delusion, she posted on her official profile. Taking a joke too seriously is just ridiculous. Just because two siblings are fighting doesn't mean a desperate outsider can cut the line. I completely tuned out all that white noise. That same afternoon, I got the call I was expecting. Thomas formally invited me to his top-floor office at the Harrison Group headquarters to discuss the operational details of the project. When the private elevator doors opened and I was escorted into the vast executive suite, I found him engrossed at his massive mahogany desk. He was reviewing the financial risk assessment section of the strategic proposal I had discreetly handed him the night before, right in the middle of the engagement storm. He flipped to the last page, frowned as he analyzed a chart, and looked up at me, his eyes scanning my features. "Did you write this part?" he asked point blank without any preamble. "Yes," I replied, taking a seat across from him and elegantly crossing my legs. "Cindy showed me a very similar version of this a while ago," he noted, leaning back slowly in his dark leather chair, evaluating me. I paused, feeling the ghost of anger run down my spine, but I kept my unwavering composure. He flatly added, "But she couldn't explain absolutely any of the hard data when I asked her about the projections." I didn't know whether to let out a cynical laugh right then or let a deep bitterness wash over me. So that was the reality. It wasn't that no one in upper management had noticed the fraud. It was simply that no one had ever bothered to confront her before. They had coddled her. Thomas shut the heavy folder with a sharp thud that echoed through the room. He rested his forearms on the desk, leaning toward me. His expression turned to stone. "Amy, there is something we need to make perfectly clear before we move forward with this." I looked him dead in the eye, holding his intense, dark gaze, bracing myself for his conditions. "I used to love Cindy," he confessed, and his brutal honesty filled every corner of the office. It wasn't a passing whim, like today's rumors suggest. I genuinely wanted to build a future and a family with her. My fingers tightened slightly around the metal hardware of my bag. The air seemed to have grown thicker, but I didn't let a single emotion leak onto my face. He took a breath and continued, his voice loaded with icy resentment and unwavering resolve. "And I let her get away with far too much disrespect because I thought she was just scared of commitment. But last night she used my family, my name, and our most important business partners as mere props to prove to the whole city how edgy and different she is. Thomas's eyes darkened with an intensity that almost made me shiver. I'm not playing her games anymore. It's over. The massive office with panoramic views of the city fell into complete and absolute silence. The weight of his final declaration hung in the air between us, sealing our alliance in the ruins of his broken devotion and my exhausted patience. What started as an act of public revenge had just morphed into something monumentally dangerous for anyone who tried to stand in our way. The silence in the office dragged on, thick and heavy with unspoken promises, until Thomas slowly stepped away from the desk. He walked with a steady stride toward an elegant walnut bar cabinet built into the wall, the sound of his designer shoes echoing with authority against the polished marble floor. He poured 2 glasses of scotch, the clinking of crystal and amber liquid breaking the deathly stillness of the room. He handed me one of the glasses without a word. I took it, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second, sparking an involuntary jolt of static electricity that we both immediately decided to ignore. From this moment on, Thomas began, leaning against the edge of his massive desk and crossing his ankles with a casual yet commanding elegance. There's no going back, Amy. If we're going to do this, if we're going to merge not just our lives in the public eye, but our family's financial empires, I need to know you're not going to fold when the pressure becomes unbearable. Because I promise you, it will. I took a slow sip of the whiskey, letting the familiar burn of the alcohol anchor me to the reality of the situation. I have lived under the pressure of being my sister's disappointing, defective shadow my entire life, Thomas. I've survived a systematic, silent, and cruel boycott, funded and backed by my own blood. Believe me when I tell you that facing a hostile board of directors or the vultures at the gossip rags sounds like child's play. A shadow of genuine admiration crossed Thomas's dark eyes. He raised his glass to me, a silent toast to our dangerous new alliance, before taking a drink. The Coastal Logistics Expansion Project, he said, shifting drastically to a corporate tone, his business mind taking the wheel. The exact one Cindy tried to pass off as her own creation. I went through it with a fine-tooth comb last night after you left. It's brilliant. It's bold. It takes calculated risks with pinpoint precision, and it projects a 5-year profit margin that my senior analyst team hasn't been able to visualize in months of grinding. Because your analysts were looking at conventional numbers, predictable patterns, I replied, standing up and walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window that offered a bird's-eye view of the lit-up city. I looked at the invisible fractures in the international supply chain. If the Harrison Group invests in the southern coastal infrastructures before the next quarter, we'll monopolize the import routes from Asia. Cindy couldn't explain that because she doesn't even understand the fundamental difference between a customs tariff and ocean freight. As of tomorrow morning, you will be officially named Chief Strategy Officer for the new joint venture, Thomas decreed, walking over to me at a slow pace. His proximity was overwhelming, an intoxicating blend of expensive cologne and absolute power that made me hold my breath for a microsecond. But in exchange, I need you to play the role of the perfect fiancé for the cameras without making a single mistake. If the board or the shareholders catch a whiff that this is just impulsive revenge or a setup, they'll block the merger over instability, stocks will tank, and we both lose. Deal, I whispered, turning to meet his intense gaze, sealing our pact high above the city. Returning to the Newell estate that night was exactly the psychological war zone I had anticipated. The second I crossed the threshold of the massive oak front door, the air felt heavy, almost toxic. My bags, carefully packed by the staff, were already piled up in the grand foyer, next to the sweeping marble staircase. My father stood in front of them, his face red with pent-up fury, fists clenched at his sides, while my mother consoled a sobbing, theatrical Cindy on the massive sofa in the adjoining living room. Did you think you could just waltz in and out of this house like nothing happened after the degrading spectacle you put on last night and the photo you posted today? My father roared, his voice bouncing off the fine wood-paneled walls, making the chandeliers rattle. You've publicly humiliated your sister, jeopardized the spotless reputation of the Newell name, and acted like a vulgar, backstabbing opportunist. I stopped a safe distance from him, my posture straight, my face locked into a mask of cold, impenetrable indifference. No, Dad, What I did was secure the merger contract with the Harrison Group that your precious Cindy almost completely destroyed with her childish arrogance. You should be thanking me for saving the future of this company. Cindy shot up from the sofa, roughly shoving my mother aside. Her eyes were red and puffy, the very picture of the wronged martyr. You stole my fiancé, Amy. You manipulated him in a moment of vulnerability. Thomas was mad at me. Yes, it was stupid. But we were going to work it out behind closed doors like we always do. You slithered in like a viper and poisoned his mind against me. Poison his mind? I let out a dry, hollow, bitter laugh that echoed through the grand foyer. Cindy, for God's sake, you told half the city's financial elite that marrying the heir of our biggest investor was as gross and unnatural as marrying your own brother. I didn't need to poison anything. You poured your own glass of cyanide in front of hundreds of witnesses and chugged it yourself. I demand you call Thomas this very instant and call off this absurd farce, my father cut in, taking a threatening step toward me, trying to use the physical intimidation that had always worked for him in the past. You will tell him you're backing out, that you are not mentally fit to take on this commitment due to your stress issues, and we will let Cindy clean up this diplomatic mess. If you refuse to comply, I will disinherit you first thing tomorrow morning. You won't see a single cent of the family shares. Not now, not ever. I looked at my father with deep, silent pity. For years, that threat would have been enough to break me, to make me apologize for breathing. For years, the terror of being disowned and thrown out on the street had kept me quiet, submissive, accepting the leftovers of my own life. But the woman standing in front of him was no longer that scared, sickly little girl. Do it, I replied, my voice icy, cutting through the air like glass. Take the shares. Strip my name from the records if it makes you feel more powerful. But let me warn you about something, Father. The exact second my name disappears from the family trust, the Harrison Group will pull all its investment capital. Thomas was very clear, explicit, and legally binding about it today. His money and the merger are conditioned solely and exclusively on my position as Chief Strategy Officer and our upcoming wedding. So, go ahead, disinherit me and watch your empire, the one you love so much, crumble to the ground in less than a week. The color completely drained from my father's face, leaving him with a sickly pallor. His mouth fell open slightly, searching for an argument, an out, but no sound came out. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew the contracts were signed in my favor. He knew, for the first time in his entire life, that I had absolute control of the board. Without adding another word, I gave a subtle nod to one of the house staff, who was watching me with wide eyes from the hallway, signaling him to take my bags to the sleek black car, already purring in the driveway. Thomas had sent his personal driver to take me to one of his private penthouses, a fortress of glass and steel in the heart of the financial district. The Newell estate was no longer my home. Now it was simply a battlefield I had conquered and left burning in my wake. The next 3 weeks were a dizzying whirlwind of closed-door board meetings, strategic press conferences, and wedding dress fittings meticulously orchestrated by top European designers. Thomas and I became a perfectly synced, lethal, and efficient machine. In public, we were the shining embodiment of high society's modern romance, knowing glances caught by the paparazzi, soft smiles exchanged at gala dinners, hands firmly intertwined under the tables of five-star restaurants. In private, we were ruthless partners, dismantling the Newell Group's inefficient old processes and integrating my logistics project at a speed that left the competition reeling. But, almost without us noticing, the tension between us was mutating in unpredictable ways. What started as a cold, calculated transactional arrangement was morphing into a deep, magnetic, and dangerously real mutual respect. We often found ourselves working into the early hours of the morning in the penthouse living room, surrounded by mountains of legal documents, port blueprints, and cold cups of coffee, debating strategies until our voices went hoarse. I discovered on those nights that Thomas wasn't just the handsome, privileged, slightly naive heir that Cindy had taken for granted for years. He was a brilliant strategist, a fierce and protective businessman who shared my insatiable thirst for efficiency and success. And he discovered that I wasn't the fragile porcelain doll my family had painted me as, to the world, but a force of nature, a hurricane that had been kept in a bottle for way too long. Our stares lingered a second longer than necessary. The accidental brushing of our hands over blueprints sent electric shocks we could no longer pretend to ignore, and the silence between us stopped, being tense and became heavy with suffocating anticipation. The ultimate turning point happened during the Harrison Foundation's annual charity gala, the most important social and philanthropic event of the season, and our first official red carpet appearance as an established couple. The Grand Hotel's opulent ballroom was decked out in tens of thousands of imported white orchids, packed with industry moguls, influential politicians, and celebrities. I wore a form-fitting emerald silk gown that hugged my curves perfectly, complemented by the dazzling Harrison diamond on my ring finger. I felt more powerful, beautiful, and confident than ever under the relentless flash of the cameras. Everything was going with enviable perfection, business flowing between glasses of champagne, until the massive mahogany front doors swung wide open without warning, and a thick, scandalized murmur rippled through the massive room like a tidal wave. Cindy had arrived. She wasn't on the guest list, of course. I had personally made sure of that. But somehow she had slipped past security, probably cashing in on old contacts who still owed her favors. And worst of all, the truly unforgivable part, she was wearing the exclusive, custom-made fiery red couture gown that Thomas had gifted her 6 months ago for their failed engagement party. It was a loud, tacky, visual declaration of war. A desperate, pathetic attempt to reclaim territory that no longer belonged to her, to scream to high society that deep down, she was still the true queen of Thomas's heart. She walked straight toward us with an arrogant stride, parting the crowd like Moses at the Red Sea, completely ignoring the stunned stares, venomous whispers, and mocking snickers from the guests. A sharp, toxic smirk curved her aggressively red lips. "Thomas, darling," Cindy purred, stopping less than 3 feet away from us, focusing all her energy on him and deliberately ignoring my physical existence beside him. "You couldn't seriously expect me to miss your family's biggest gala, after all." She paused dramatically, trailing a hand down the red silk on her hip. "You know perfectly well this dress was always your absolute favorite on me." I felt a sharp, icy stab of anger in my chest, ready to tear her apart in front of everyone. But before I could even open my mouth to verbally annihilate her, Thomas did something that no one, not even me, saw coming. He didn't return her smile. He didn't even blink. His expression instantly locked into an impenetrable mask of ice, his dark eyes radiating a level of contempt so pure, absolute, and cutting that it made the onlookers who had crowded around us waiting for a scandal instinctively step back. Without taking his eyes off Cindy for a single second, holding eye contact to assert his dominance, Thomas slid his large hand down to my bare waist through the gown's cutout, pulling me flush against his body with undeniable, overwhelming possessiveness. He dipped his head abruptly, and right there, in front of hundreds of guests, shareholders, his parents, and the press photographers who wouldn't stop flashing their cameras, he kissed me. It wasn't the rehearsed, soft, subtle kiss we saved for the tabloid cameras. It was a deep, devouring kiss loaded, with a burning, desperate passion that left me completely breathless and weak in the knees. It was a mark of absolute ownership, a declaration of war against the past that silenced the entire massive ballroom in a single instance of collective shock. When he finally broke away from my lips, breathing heavily, his eyes burned with a new, wild, protective intensity. Then, he slowly turned his face back to Cindy, who was now deathly pale, shaking with humiliation and suppressed rage. "Security!" Thomas called out, his deep voice slicing through the room's tense air like the crack of a whip ringing out above the silence. "Ms. Newell has come to the wrong event and is disturbing my guests. Escort her to the exit, immediately, through the service doors, and make sure, under threat of termination, that she never comes within 30 feet of my future wife ever again." 2 security guards in immaculate black suits with expressions carved from granite flanked Cindy before she could utter another coherent sound. The fiery red of her exclusive silk dress, which just minutes ago was meant to be a dazzling banner of absolute dominance, now looked like a pathetic flag of surrender, being dragged across the ballroom's gleaming marble floor. "Let go of me! I'm Cindy Newell! Thomas, you can't really be doing this to me," my sister shrieked, her voice suddenly losing every trace of that rehearsed elegance, cracking into high-pitched notes of pure hysteria and desperation. "I'm the love of your life. You promised me." Thomas didn't even deign to turn his head to watch her leave. He kept his dark, burning eyes locked on mine as Cindy's useless struggling and humiliating screams slowly faded down the hotel's vast corridors, swallowed up by the heavy service doors. The silence that followed in the ballroom was deafening. No one dared to breathe. Then, with the same fluidity of a symphony conductor, Thomas raised his champagne glass to the paralyzed crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, apologies for the minor interruption," he announced, his voice projecting a lethal calm and total control. "Please, continue to enjoy the evening. Let's toast to the future. Let's toast to my fiancé." As if a spell had been broken, the string orchestra in the corner struck up a soft waltz again. Conversations resumed in a rushed, excited hum, and the photographers lowered their cameras, knowing they already had the front page of the Century. In that exact moment, in front of the city's most powerful and ruthless elite, Cindy Newell's reign was officially reduced to ashes, and mine was crowned in iron and fire. Hours later, when the city was asleep under a blanket of fog and blinking lights, we walked into the dead silence of Thomas's penthouse. The ride back in the limousine had passed without a single word, but the air between us buzzed with an electricity so thick you could almost taste it. The second the heavy solid oak door clicked shut behind us with finality, I dropped my small designer clutch on the entryway console and turned to face him. "That kiss," I started, my voice barely a whisper in the dimness of the living room, lit only by the city skyline. That wasn't in the contract, Thomas. That wasn't in the plan we rehearsed." Thomas slowly took off his tuxedo jacket, tossing it over a leather armchair, and started loosening his black bow tie. He walked toward me with the deliberate steps of a predator, stopping mere inches from my face. His breathing was heavy, and the corporate mask of coldness was entirely gone, revealing a man consumed by an urgency that made me tremble. "No, it wasn't," he admitted, his voice deep and raspy, his gaze dropping to my lips before locking back onto my eyes. "The cameras, the press, the shareholders, they were the perfect excuse my rational mind needed to justify what my body and instincts have been wanting to do for weeks. Ever since that night you showed me that damn tablet in your office and I saw the fire in your eyes, Amy." He raised a hand, his warm fingers gently tracing my jawline, a staggering contrast to the harshness he had displayed hours earlier. "I thought I was making a brilliant deal with a ruthless partner to save an empire," he continued, leaning in until his forehead brushed mine. "But I realized I was teaming up with the only woman in this damn city who can look me dead in the eye without asking for handouts, without pretending to be something she's not. I don't want this to just be a contract, Amy. I don't want to fake it anymore." I closed my eyes, feeling the walls of ice I had carefully built around my heart for years, to protect myself from the rejection of my own blood, start to melt under the searing heat of his confession. When I opened them again, there was no fear, no calculations, no shadows of the past. I brought my hands up, gripping the lapels of his crisp white shirt, and pulled him toward me with a strength I didn't know I had. The kiss we shared in the darkness of that penthouse wasn't a performance to destroy Cindy. It was a silent vow. It was wild, hungry, the collision of two splintered souls who had finally found their perfect fit in the chaos. That night, the cold business arrangement evaporated, forging in its place an unbreakable loyalty and a love so fierce it would consume anyone who tried to stand in our way. 3 days later, the time came for the killing blow. The Newell Group boardroom, perched on the top floor of my family's corporate headquarters, smelled of stale leather and old fear. Thomas and I walked in together, our synced footsteps echoing against the mahogany wood. Sitting across the massive oval table were my parents and Cindy. My sister was wearing huge dark sunglasses to hide her puffy eyes, looking gaunt, shrunk down in her designer chair like it was suddenly 3 sizes too big for her. My father was sweating profusely, loosening his tie every few seconds, while my mother stared down at her, own intertwined hands on the table, unable to meet our eyes. I didn't sit down. I walked straight to the head of the table and slid a thick black leather folder across the polished surface, stopping it exactly in front of my father. What is this, Amy?" he stammered, his voice losing all the patriarchal authority he had once wielded like a weapon against me. That, Father, is your letter of resignation as CEO of the Newell Group, effective immediately, along with the absolute and irrevocable transfer of your majority voting rights on the board into my name, I stated, my tone clinical, and completely void of mercy. On page 3, you'll also find Cindy's official dismissal from any honorary or executive position within the company, cutting off her access to the operating trust funds. Cindy gasped, clutching a hand to her chest, while my father shot to his feet, slamming both hands down on the table. You're crazy. You can't do this to me. I built this company. I am your father, he roared, but the panic in his eyes betrayed his defeat. Thomas, who had stayed silent, watching the scene with analytical coldness, finally chimed in. He leaned lazily against the back of my chair, crossing his arms. She can, Arthur, and she will. And if you'll allow me a piece of financial advice, I strongly suggest you sign that document before I count to 3. Because in the second folder Amy has in her bag, there's a detailed report of the forensic audits we ordered behind your backs over the past week. The color vanished from my father's face, leaving him looking like a corpse. Thomas smiled, a smile that was all teeth and zero warmth. We found the funds you embezzled to cover your precious Cindy's ridiculous, exorbitant gambling debts and offshore splurges over the last 3 years, dressing them up as operating expenses. If you don't sign right now, the Harrison Group pulls out of the merger in 10 minutes. We call the press to explain the massive fraud, and tomorrow morning the SEC freezes your accounts before throwing you in a federal cell. The room plunged into an absolute vacuum, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. My father looked at Cindy, who shrank back sobbing, finally proving her utter uselessness in the real world. Then he looked at me, the daughter he had systematically discarded, marginalized and underestimated, searching for a trace of pity, an ember of the sickly little girl who used to beg for his approval. He found absolutely nothing. There was only steel, ice, and the ruthless determination of a queen who had come to claim her blood-stained throne. With trembling hands and shaky breaths, my father picked up the expensive gold fountain pen from the table. The scratch of the nib against the thick contract paper echoed like a coup de grace in the dead silence of the room. It was over. The debts were settled. 6 months later, St. Patrick's Cathedral was decked out in thousands of white roses and peonies, glowing under the light of the centuries-old stained glass. I walked down the long aisle toward the altar, but not on my father's arm. He wasn't invited. None of them were. I walked alone, head held high, draped in a French lace and silk gown that flowed like pure water around my steps. It wasn't a costume nor a corporate strategy. It was my ultimate armor of victory. Waiting for me at the end of the altar was Thomas, his face lit up by a devotion so pure and profound it stole my breath every time he looked at me. We were no longer the main characters in a high society scandal. We were the undisputed owners of the largest logistics empire on the East Coast, inseparable partners in business and in life. When I reached him, he took my hands firmly, his thumbs gently stroking my knuckles. In front of the priest, in front of our allies, and in front of the world we had conquered together, we said our vows. There were no empty promises or cliches. There were absolute truths. I choose you, Amy, Thomas murmured before sliding the platinum and diamond wedding band onto my finger, his voice just for my ears, heavy with an intensity that made my heart race. I chose you in the shadows. I choose you in the light, and I'll choose you every single damn day for the rest of my life. You are my empire. And you are my freedom, Thomas, I replied, feeling a tear of pure happiness roll down my cheek as I cupped his face. We did it. When the priest pronounced us husband and wife, the kiss that sealed our union sparked a deafening standing ovation that made the ancient walls of the cathedral shake. We stepped out into the bright midday sun, a shower of white petals raining down on us, surrounded by photographers cheering our names. Somewhere far away, hiding in anonymity and choking, on her own bitterness, I knew Cindy was watching the news, witnessing her ultimate ruin as I ascended to the throne that she herself, with her own arrogance, had handed over to me. But I didn't care anymore. I looked at Thomas, the man who had given me the sword to break my chains and the heart to build a new kingdom, and I knew with absolute certainty that the game of shadows was over for good. Now we were the ones writing the rules, shining in our own blinding light.